Okay, thank you all for joining, everybody. This is the third in a series of webinars which we're running over the course of this year, covering how, why, and when to use social media data. So what we're hoping with this series is that by the end of it, you should feel equipped to have a go at running your own social insight projects or feel confident in commissioning them. So if you're interested in watching back the previous sessions that we've done, you can find those at our website, listenandlearnresearch.com, or on our LinkedIn profile. We also have released recently a written step-by-step guide to DIY social insights, which you can also download from our website. So if you haven't come across Listen and Learn Research before, we are a market research agency, but we help our clients understand their customers better and make better business decisions by using humans to make sense of social media data. So today we're looking at how social insights should fit into your research mix. So when might you choose it over traditional research methods, and how it can work alongside other primary research methodologies. So for me, social is a hugely exciting data source. And for a lot of our clients, they're coming to social for the first time. So a lot of our team comes from a traditional market research background. So things like surveys, focus groups, interviews, online communities, and diaries. We've used them. We absolutely recognise the value of those methods. But our clients are coming to us because they have a feeling that they might be missing out on something. It might be that they know that their audience is active on social and they're worried about missing out on that viewpoint. It might be that they're feeling a little bit stuck, that they tend to keep using the same methodologies and that they're not necessarily finding out anything new. Or it might just be that they want to try out something new and exciting, something that will get their stakeholders excited and engaged with the research. But what's trickier is actually knowing when to use social insight. So when might you pick social over those more tried and trusted primary research solutions? So we do recognise that there are barriers. It might be that you don't necessarily have a deep understanding of how social works and you don't have the time to explore it. It might be that you're not 100% sure how it differs to methods which you're more used to. You might be concerned about having to convince the more traditional stakeholders about trying a new method. There might be concerns about the robustness or the representativeness of social. And in some cases, I know it can just be easier to default to the usual methods which you use. But you are missing out by doing this. And the reason for this is that people don't talk to researchers the way that they talk to each other. So social data gives us a window into the things that really matter to people, the things that people might not share with researchers. So we wanted to use this session to sum up 10 reasons why you might use social data for a project instead of or alongside traditional quant and qual methods. And we're hoping that this will help you to feel more confident about making those decisions about when to use social insight in the future. So, when should you be thinking about using social insight instead of traditional methods? So, in my market research career, I've worked on probably hundreds of quant surveys. And I know how difficult it can be to find people who actually truly engage with what you're asking them. So over the course of a 15 to 20 minute survey, we know that people will start to check out. So some people might bend the truth to get through screening questions or to complete the survey quicker. Often people will be sat at home doing an online survey on their mobile, and they'll have half a mind on something else. It might be one of many surveys which they're filling out that day. And that's when you start to end up with data that might look a little bit weird, or open ends where people just mash their keyboards or give one word answers. In qual, it might be, that respondent that despite all your careful recruiting methods somehow slips through the net and doesn't seem quite kind of relevant to what you're actually trying to find out. So social is kind of the complete opposite. of this because it gives you access to the opinions of people who actually really care about your topic. So people who are engaged enough with your brand or your category or issues like sustainability that they will post about them online spontaneously for free. And so this can help you if you're struggling with issues with poor respondent engagement. And it's actually a really good view into what really matters to people when they're not answering a survey. Because if you think about a survey, at the end of the day, that just kind of reflects what you or your client or your stakeholders are interested in. And we do see people posting about all sorts of topics online. So even those topics where you might think that it would be harder to find that engagement, we recently did a project looking at reviews for a piece of accounting software, and people are actually really engaged with that topic. And it might have been quite hard to find that level of kind of detail and engagement using a survey. So scenario number one is when you're struggling with respondent engagement. So scenario number two might be if you're not quite sure what to ask or how to word it. So maybe there is a topic which you want to explore. You know it's interesting, but it's not one that you know much about. So you're not quite sure what to ask or how to word it. You might not even be entirely sure what you want to find out. So we've just talked about how a survey or a discussion guide is basically a kind of a list of questions which reflects your agenda. But often this will mean that the data you get back will also be reflective of your agenda. So you might be missing out on things which are on your customer's radar but haven't actually registered with you. You can't ask about what you don't know, but you don't know. So an example of this might be if you were exploring customer satisfaction and people's experiences with your products. So you could write a survey with a list of areas and ask people to rate their experiences in each of those areas. But what you can't ask about is the areas where you're not actually aware that people are having problems. You can maybe include a more general open-ended question about whether people have experienced any other problems, but often people will be completing a survey weeks or months after the fact, so they might not remember in all that much detail. So what we can do is to use social to understand how people are actually talking about their experiences with your product in the moment, whether that's through reviews or comments to your online customer service channels. And that can help you to surface new areas that you then might want to put into your customer service surveys so that you can track or explore them in more detail. Another kind of use case is you might be looking at kind of woollier concepts, so things like sustainability or diversity and inclusion. So these are topics which mean a lot of different things to different people. They can be really hard to define. Brands that use the wrong language or the wrong angles to talk about these topics can face a real backlash. So what social does is it lets you understand the natural language that people use to talk about kind of more woolly concepts like sustainability. And that means that you can then reflect that natural language in your marketing or in further primary research to make sure it's as relevant as possible. So social can help you understand what those consumer priorities actually are, and then you can mirror them in primary or in your kind of marketing or positioning. The next use case is when you want to form some initial hypotheses to explore in primary. So this is very closely linked with the last area, but it's an example of how social can work really well with primary research. So you can use social to find out those consumer priorities, work out the natural language which people are using, and use that to word your questions. And then you can size up the different areas which you found in social in a survey using a NatRep sample. Or you can explore areas where you want to know more at a deeper level with Qual, because obviously actually asking people questions is one of the things which is harder to do in social. You can also use social to help you build the initial understanding which you need to develop concepts. So that might be new marketing territories or product positioning ideas, or it might be new product features or services, innovation ideas. Social can help you ensure that your ideas for new concepts are really consumer-led before you start testing them in quant or qual. Area number 4 is those situations when you want that qualitative depth, but you also need the reassurance and the robustness of quant numbers, or you want to understand why, not just what. So social is an incredible tool for actually being able to give you both that quant and that qual view of what's happening at the same time, and often in a much more kind of cost and time effective way than you might get through running a multi-methodology piece. But this all hinges on the way in which you actually analyze and make sense of your social data. So it's all about going beyond dashboards and keyword counts and making sure that you're actually reading through a robust number of comments. But you also need to take a systematic approach to this analysis. So later sessions, which we'll do this year, will cover the kind of ins and outs of our social insight approach. But just to give you a quick idea, in any given research project which we do, we'll be looking at hundreds or thousands of relevant social media comments or images or videos. And what we'll do is we'll read through an initial sample of that data, and we'll create a code frame that covers all of the emerging themes that are coming out of the data. And then we'll use that code frame to systematically make sense of the rest of the data. So we'll read through 1,000 comments and we will code them up to capture their meaning. And this means that we can then quickly and easily see the frequencies for key themes. So, 20% of people are talking about natural ingredients within a topic of sustainability, or 40% of the audience are people who have children. And to take it a step further, we can then build out crosstabs. So, what proportion of people with children are talking about natural ingredients? How does that differ to people without children? So, that is our quantitative view. And then the qualitative element is once you've identified those key themes, it's going back into the comments, rereading them, and really interrogating the data. So if we're interested in natural ingredients, it might be asking questions like, well, why are people talking about natural ingredients? What are the drivers for buying natural? Are there particular ingredients or products which are standing out? How easy is it for people to find those natural ingredients at the moment? And that gives us our qualitative view. And obviously, this is a qualitative view which is based off hundreds or thousands of comments, often quite in depth comments. So it tends to be at a much larger scale than traditional qual. And number 5, so halfway through, the next scenario when you might choose to use social is when you are struggling to recruit a niche audience. So I think a great example of this came from someone I actually used to work with who had done social insight into the lives of opiate users in America. And this was obviously a relatively small group of people, but it was people who wouldn't admit in daily life that they had this habit or that they had a problem. Often, their families wouldn't even know. This is a group of people who would be difficult, if not impossible, to find for primary research. And then once you'd found them, there would probably be issues with how much we'd actually be willing to share with a researcher. So the power of social is that we can find all sorts of niche groups taking part in really active online communities. So we found that my colleague found that there were opiate users who were using anonymous forums to discuss their daily lives and often their struggles with getting clean in great detail. We also see that there are really active patient communities for all sorts of medical conditions. We find people gathering online around all sorts of obscure conditions, obscure interests. So we recently did a project where part of it was profiling mushroom artists, so people that draw mushrooms. Or you might even just be looking for people who are using quite a niche product and you want to understand what those experiences are like. Because often it can be quite hard to find the right people using something that's quite niche, using traditional methods. But on social, we can target our listening queries to kind of immediately pick up conversations where people are talking about the product or the topic in question. And then more broadly, there might be whole demographics which are a bit trickier to kind of find in kind of traditional primary research. So for example, Gen Z males, young men, if you want to understand how they feel about something, they're on their thousands on TikTok and in other social platforms. But I know from experience, it can be pretty difficult to recruit at any kind of great scale for quant research. Okay, area number 6 is when you're researching a sensitive topic. So this could be anything from conversations around health or mental health or finances or even things like sex lives or taking drugs. So often if you want to explore a topic like this in any great depth, you'll need a really skilled qual researcher who can make the respondent feel at ease and who can ask those probing questions to really get to the truth of how someone feels. But at the same time, we know that having a researcher in the room can have an effect. So people might be embarrassed, they might not want to tell them certain things, they might change their stories to make themselves seem more socially desirable or acceptable. There's also ethical questions, how much can you actually ask someone? There's considerations around not causing someone distress. And social is actually a really great way of getting around this because it gives people anonymity if they want it. So, particularly on online forums, we can find people sharing really raw, unpolished experiences, often more than they would be willing to share with a researcher. So, just to give you a few examples, projects we've done in the past have been around loneliness, which is a topic which people often find quite hard to talk about or might not want to talk about. We've done projects around what it feels like to be diagnosed with cancer and the questions which people have at that moment. And obviously, you can't hang around outside a doctor's surgery grabbing people at that moment, but people will go online because they're wondering, who to turn to. We've recently done a piece on sexual health, and there were loads of examples of people who were too embarrassed to go to a doctor, but were uploading pictures of their symptoms online in case anyone had any advice on diagnosis or on treatment. And going back to that opiates example, that's something which people might not want to admit in a survey or a focus group for fear of getting into trouble, but we can find people having those conversations online. Okay, so area number 7, if you might want to find out how people feel in the moment which they're doing something. So I feel like in the moment research became a bit of a buzzword in the industry a few years ago. If you've not come across it, it's all about trying to get closer to the moments where people actually make decisions. So, what toothpaste to buy in the supermarket or what should I watch on TV on a Tuesday evening. And of course, if you ask someone about those sorts of decisions in a survey or a discussion group, weeks later, it becomes really hard for people to remember what actually led them to a particular decision, or they'll start post-rationalizing their choices. Or going back to that customer satisfaction example earlier, it might be that the issues that stand out for a respondent when they're taking part in your quarterly tracker aren't actually the issues that really annoyed them at the time when they happened a couple of months ago. So loads of great tech solutions cropped up to help people explore in the moment more cost efficiently. So there were geo-fenced apps that could ping a survey to someone when they entered a supermarket, or augmented reality shopping shelves that really mimicked that in-store experience, or online diaries where people could keep track of how they were feeling as they completed a particular task. And these solutions definitely have a place. I've used some of them, they're great, but there's still something about them which feels a little bit forced and unnatural. So the benefit of social in these situations is that we can see people actually spontaneously sharing their thoughts and opinions and concerns in the moments they're happening. So not when they're in an artificial scenario that's been set up by a researcher. So if someone was choosing a new financial product or buying a new car or booking a holiday, people often share quite detailed accounts online of the different options that they're considering in that moment and the types of questions and information and advice that they need. If we add Google search data, that's a whole other layer which kind of tells us the questions that people have as they're researching a particular topic. And not just that, but we can see which websites people go on to visit. And with that, it becomes possible to build out really detailed purchase journeys of the different things which people are considering at each step of the way. Or we can understand the emotions and information people need along the patient journey when they've been diagnosed and are seeking treatment, or any kind of research task where you need to understand those particular moments in time. Okay, area number 8 is when you want to understand developing trends. So social is great for this because it gives us that really broad, macro, up to the minute view of how consumer behaviors and attitudes are changing. So I mean, if you think about it, there's thousands, if not millions of posts being shared on social every minute. So it's always on and it's very reflective of what consumer priorities are right now, which can obviously be quite hard to replicate with primary unless you're doing very regular research. So using social, we can tap into those emerging signals. So, what are early adopters talking about? Because that's a group who can be quite hard to recruit for primary. How is that trickling into the mainstream? There's a load of historical social data available as well, so you can actually start to understand the growth and the trajectory of different topics. So understand the strength of different trends, understand which ones might have staying power, or you might even look to understand the life cycle of previous trends, what that has looked like, to maybe help inform your planning. So a slightly different use case within this, and we've recently been talking to an entertainment company about understanding what the life cycle of online conversation looks like for certain shows. So how does that grow over time? What's the trajectory and pace of that? So that we can then build a benchmark for what social conversations should ideally look like. So for future shows, they can be more confident in whether to continue investing a show, knowing whether the social conversation kind of looks like they'd expect it to, and those trend lines are looking healthy. Number 9 is when you need data quickly. So I did kind of and ah about including this because in my mind, you do get the most out of social data if you spend a good amount of time with it and you interrogate it and you code it up and you do those qual deep dives. Our typical project probably lasts around 6 weeks. But the beauty of social data is that it can also be suited to those really quick projects as well, because compared to primary research, there's essentially no field work period. The data is already out there. You just have to be able to find it, whether that's scraping it or designing a social listening query to pick it up. And we will be doing a session on designing a social listening query next, so look out for that if you're interested. So if you want a quick idea of how much interest there is around a topic, or maybe whether consumers are more interested in, one type of product over another, or what the key themes of conversation are around a particular topic, then social can give you that. And actually, it's quite common in our projects. We will often do a landscaping stage first. So we will size the social conversation around lots of topics. And then we'll use that to decide which ones we want to dive into in more detail. And then number 10, the final area. So I put this in at number 10 because it's not actually strictly comparing social to traditional primary research methods, but I did think it was still interesting to make that distinction between the kind of social insight which we're talking about and the kind of big data, kind of machine-led approaches, which you might think about when you hear the term social listening. So there are a lot of providers out there who can take huge amounts of social data, run it through an algorithm, and come out with an idea of what the top themes of conversation are. And there's very much a place for that. They can speed up that initial process quite well. But where that methodology falls down is in actually being able to explain what those top themes mean. So what's driving them? What is the why? So that kind of machine-led approach, it can give you the breadth, but it can't really give you the depth. And part of the reason for that is that, in my opinion at least, we're not really at a stage yet where machines can really understand the nuance which is present in social conversations. There's still work to be done in helping them to understand things like sarcasm or helping them to accurately understand sentiment a lot of the time. And as when we kind of start going outside of English language, then capabilities tend to kind of drop even more. And in my opinion, humans can still interpret the behavior of other humans much more meaningfully than machines can. They can apply cultural context. They can conceptualize themes from reading hundreds of comments in a way which machines just can't really do at the moment. So those are 10 scenarios where you might choose to use social instead of other methods. In terms of the actual types of projects where you might use social data, you can see on screen here some of the use cases which you most often see for social. So the business cases and the stakeholders who it can help the most. We have covered this in a previous session. I think it was our first session in the series, if you want to go back and watch that, or feel free to get in touch if you want to learn more. Just to give you a really quick summary, the 6 areas where we see social working best are in questions of strategy. So this is around helping organizations understand their place in the world and what their path should be. So it might be understanding developing trends, understanding how people talk about your brand or your product or your service and how that compares to competitors. It might be understanding which audiences are out there and how to appeal to them. The second area is that of purpose. So those woollier concepts that I mentioned earlier, sustainability, diversity, ethical supply chains, or even just being a great place for people to work. It's about using social to understand what should your proposition and your messaging be to be as relevant as possible. Third area is that of communication and marketing, so using social to understand what matters to people, how to talk to them in their own language, how to lead your marketing with consumer priorities. We can also use social to understand how people have responded to previous campaigns or competitor messaging and understand what kind of content resonates for most. Social is also great for just helping us to understand the different ways in which people are being influenced online and why, so you can then tweak your comm strategy to be as effective as possible. The fourth area is about innovation. So again, around understanding how behaviours are changing in real time. What are early adopters doing? What are the unmet needs or frustrations or jobs to be done in your category so you can innovate to meet them? And the last couple, improvement is that piece around understanding what's going right and wrong for people when they use your products or when they use competitor products, so that you can create a strategy to improve the experience. And lastly, we have appeal, which is using social to build out the new path to purchase. So it's understanding why, how, and where people buy products or make decisions to use a particular a brand or organization, so that you can make sure that your brand is in the right places at the right time with the right messages. And then finally, just to sum up some of those ways in which social insight can work with other methodologies. So social does work really well on its own. It's a great soloist, but it works really well as part of an orchestra as well. So some of the ways you might use it alongside primary methods, you can use it as a way to build a foundational knowledge base around a topic that you don't know much about. So find out those key themes and then use quant or qual to dig deeper into those. We've obviously touched as well upon using social to find out the natural language which people use to talk about a topic, so that you can make sure that your questions are worded in as relevant a way as possible. Social can also help with sample design, so helping you to figure out what sort of people you might want in your research sample based on who the key voices are around your topic, your brand, or your category. You can also use social to help you build out initial concepts based on consumer needs, which you can then test in primary research. And you can also use social the opposite end, so using social after primary research to help explain your findings. So add the why behind the what's of a tracking survey, or help you to interpret trends in the data. Or you might use primary research to kind of surface initial themes and then use social to explore those at a broader level and find out things which you don't already know. So thank you for listening. Hopefully this has sparked some ideas for when you might use social insight in the future. As always, please do feel free to get in touch if you need help with designing or running a social insight project, or if you fancy giving it a go yourself, I would encourage you to check out our written step-by-step user guide, which you can find on our website. So please do look out for the next sessions in this series. We're taking a bit of a break for summer, but I think it's September which we'll be back with our next session, which will be getting into the nitty-gritty of the approach. So how to write a killer social listening query. So we've got a few minutes left in case there are any questions. Doesn't look like there are any. Okay, yep, so thank you all for listening. Again, if you do have any questions, please do feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, hopefully we will see you at the next session. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.